People in the waiting room. Let's first enter them. Okay, good evening and a very good morning to all our USA guests. I'm Ursula Khan and I'm part of Office of Internationalization at UMT. OIN actually regularly conducts these monthly talk series where we bring, experts from world over to discuss. Just a second. Yeah. So OIN actually regularly conducts monthly talk series where we bring experts from world over to discuss about different topics each month. Our basic aim is to explore together and different issues and challenges and share each other's practices and learn from them. So this will be an hour-long session and last 25 minutes will be dedicated for question answer session. I'll suggest all the participants to kindly keep their mics switched off during the session and please use them during the question answer session only. And you can write your comments or questions in the last section also. And when you have a question to ask, please click the hand raise icon and moderator will get back to you. The topic we are living in a very divided and unequal world, and that is socially fractured, economically uneven. There is hatred, hypocrisy, prejudice, conflict, war. These are all the things that are creating, uncertainty and destabilizing our societies. And when it comes to South Asia, the causes for division within and between our countries are many, that are creating vulnerability in our societies. And add to this the plight of gender disparity or discrimination, these issues even become more complex. So the patriarchal values and social norms keep these, gender inequalities alive in South Asia. So from many perspectives, especially when it comes to women in South Asia, they find themselves in a subordinate position to men and are socially or culturally and economically dependent on the men. Women at large are, excluded from making decisions and have limited access to resources. So it would be interesting to listen to both our speakers, give their perspective about this gender disparity and resulting consumption patterns in this discussion. I'd like to introduce both my esteemed speakers for today. Our first guest for today is Ms. Wendy Adrienne Chen. She is associated with Tufts University, USA. And her area of expertise and research are gender and sexuality in the Middle East, Islam and West, Muslims and liberalism, readings in South Asian history, and communities in America. Our second guest for today's discussion is Dr. Amreen Salahuddin. She's working as assistant professor at Department of Sociology in UMT. She brings quite an experience of around 15 years with her. She has 5 books to her credit, mashallah. Her research work titled Feminism in Modern Urdu Poetesses was published in 2005, and it's included in syllabus of gender studies at various universities. Her research areas are gender in literature, gender identities, feminism, fiction, women writers, women vendors, and theological debates. Thank you to both of you for joining us today. And without further ado, I'll request Ms. Wendy to start with her discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Khan, for such a nice introduction. I will start with sharing the screen. And thanks to UMT for organizing this panel. And I'm very excited to have a discussion with Dr. Salahuddin and everyone in this panel. My talk today is about gender and consumption in South Asian history. I hope you all can hear me well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, no.
I'm, as you've heard, a Tufts University PhD student of history, and this is a work in progress, so I look forward to your feedback. By way of introduction, here's a definition of consumerism: a mode of interaction in which goods with market value mediate human relationships. And in terms of gender studies, we are more interested in how each gender interacts within this field of consumption and consumerism. And an interesting point in terms of gender studies is the agency question. Do women have agency through the goods they purchase and the goods they use in their daily lives? And this research was inspired by Dr. Dorothy Koh's study of the fashion in foot binding in late imperial China. Her work is titled Cinderella's Sister, a revisionist history of foot binding. And she argued that women's agency was expressed through the designs of footwear and competition with each other in terms of their size of the feet, the smaller the better. She also observed how the commercialization of the urban economy could be represented through the ways shoes were manufactured. In the earlier periods of foot binding, women handmade their own shoes. Towards the later period, closer to the mid 1700s, professional shoemakers and sellers, which targeted the female market, emerged in urban areas. Similarly, we can try to approach South Asian history and the consumption practices within South Asia with such methods and examine the materials of everyday objects as well as advertisements. One historian, Dr. Abigail McGowan, has observed through her study of the handicraft industry a larger argument that national elites attempted to control and define what was traditional or authentic artisan handicrafts. And through such a discourse, they have promoted industrialization and the predominance of industrial goods in India in the 20th century. So historians of modern India and perhaps modern Pakistan have focused on the production side of goods. And my proposition is to get around this tendency through studying consumption practices. One approach, as I've mentioned, is the study of advertisements. And here we have two interesting examples to understand how British or other consumer goods affected people's lives in the modern or late colonial era. On the left, we have an advertisement titled India's Hope, Her Textile Industry. And we have an image of Mother India holding a banner with the text saying, "From Bombay to Burma and from Kashmir to Comoran, Etsu fabrics are found everywhere." And so there's a claim on national space through the practice of advertising certain goods to the national population. And on the right, we have an elephant brand, Swadeshi matches from the same period of independence agitation in South Asia. So through such studies, we can challenge the simple story of Westernization and industrialization. And we can also examine the claim whether there was a displacement of handmade Indian goods by machine-made Western ones, or was it a more complicated narrative? An interesting feminist critique of consumerism is also a point of interest. For example, the writer Begum Rokeya, also known as Rokeya Sakhwat Hussain, wrote in an essay criticizing the practice of wearing and gifting jewelry as patriarchal chains. Quote, "A keeper of cattle pierces the nose of a bullock to make it wear a nose rope. Similarly, in this country, Our husbands put nose rings on our noses. The nose ring indicates that the husband is alive. Therefore, as you just saw, sisters, your precious jewels cannot be anything other than badges of slavery. Funnily enough, the more the number of these badges of slavery, the more respected and distinguished the wearer becomes in society. So, in her opinion, jewelry keeps women within heterosexual marriage institutions. Another probably male anonymous writer echoes such sentiments in his critique in 1876. He writes, in our country, there is no systematic way of spending money. We spend a great deal of it for the dead, for marriages, and for jewelry. People believe that their reputations are involved in such senseless spending. But if we spend the same money instead in work of such ways that will earn us an eternal place in the palace of prestige, wouldn't that be better? So he is one example of many others who echoed the same need for restraint in the context of nationalist agitation. And beyond South Asia, even South Asian indentured laborers who ventured as far as the Caribbeans had exhibited an attachment to jewelry, and it attracted the attention of a European businessman who managed his laborers. And he noted how the indentured women melted their salaries of silver coins into jewelry. So, this is an interesting approach in terms of consumption and citizenship. And here I will go into the past in terms of how we got to the present and examine historically the consumption practices of Mughal princesses. Travel narratives recorded how Mughal princesses took in administrative affairs and asserted their presence through supporting art and architecture. So many travelers sought the favors of powerful and influential Mughal princesses by presenting gifts to them in order to gain trade concessions. Jahanara Begum, as we see on the left, daughter of Shah Jahan, was one of the few Mughal women who owned a ship. Her ship, the Sahibi, was docked at the port in Surat. Here we have a drawing of Surat in 1670s, and carried trade with the Dutch and English. Quote, this princess had an annual income of 3 million rupees, in addition to the revenues of the port of Surat assigned for her expenditure on betel. She had, in addition, many precious stones and jewels that had been given to her by her father, wrote a traveler named Manucci. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Jahanara Begum built the caravanserai known as Sarai Begum Sahib or the Begum Sarai in Delhi. Here is a picture of a contemporary caravanserai, but not the one she built because the one she built is lost to sources. She also constructed a garden where many festivals were celebrated within, called Begum Kabag. One of them was called Pankom Kamela. It was a fair meant exclusively for royal women. There were stalls for lovely embroidered kurtas and dupattas, colorful bangles and other jewelry, toys and all kinds of delicious food, gleaming utensils and sparkling crockery, paintings, clay figures, etc. Men were usually not allowed inside, and today this area is known as the Gandhi Maidan. A later princess, Begum Samru's palace, was built inside this garden as well. And today it is a market for electric goods. And this garden is just outside today's Chandni Chowk, which exists as one of the oldest bazaars in South Asia. And it was also built by Jahanara Begum. And here we have an illustration of Chandni Chowk from 1867. And it's interesting to connect how the preeminence of certain Mughal princesses shaped and formed consumption practices of South Asia today. So here we have contemporary photos of Chandni Chowk in Delhi. Um, and an interesting study from the art historians inform us that styles of craft that emerged in the Mughal period, such as shikankari, have survived within designs we have today. And we can infer how Mughal patronage through consuming such goods encouraged stylistic innovations and the merging of Persian designs with indigenous folk art motifs. But such a transition from the Mughal era to the modern era was also rife with the trauma of the loss of sovereignty, etc. And I would like to quote one of the Urdu poets of this time, uh, late Mughal era, Sauda, on the desolation of Shah Jahanabad, because he also invokes consumerism and consumption. Daughters of noble families, the burqa they wear on their heads goes full length down to their feet, and their manner of begging from everybody is like this. It's prayer beads made from the pure soil of Karbala. Take it, give whatever price you will. And in the same poem, he writes, from the houses ladies of nobilities have emerged. They didn't get an ordinary palanquin, those who used to be possessors of fancy litters. So he bemoans the loss of a certain sense of order by noting the goods that women had or did not have in the late Mughal period. Next, I would like to move on to some of the colonial era goods and shifting towards independence. During the colonial period, a reconfiguration of labor and capital happens as the British tried to make India more productive on imperial terms. Scholars have noted how the empire created a dominant British taste through its production of trade in tea and sugar. Tea and sugar became more prominent in South Asian laborers' diets as cheap sources of energy. I would like to focus more on the non-agricultural related commodities. So in the 1870s, nationalists argued that Swadeshi goods could ease Indian poverty and eventually end British colonial domination. And this is possibly in response to what they saw as an influx of British manufactured goods. And often in these writings, women were addressed primarily as consumers who would support such a scheme instead of industrialists who would set up their own production sites. So a Bombay exhibition in 1903 segregated finished goods for women as consumers and raw materials and technology for the men who they saw as industrialists. Similarly, historians have focused on questions of production, but I would like to provide an interesting description on some of the goods and how they left the mills into people's households. In an 1893 article published in a Gujarati magazine, the author gave a long list of foreign things common in households, including English dhotis, French satin saris, pocket watches, bats and balls for games, egg beaters, spoons, castor oil, kerosene lamps, and matchsticks. So here I tried to provide an image of what the sewing machine and egg beater might have looked like. On the left, we have an advertisement for Usha sewing machines, equals world's best from the year 1950. And on the right, it's an egg beater that people substituted for hand mixing yogurt. And here's another image of what a kerosene lamp in this household might have looked like. It is called a Bombay lamp from the early 1900s. And here's another kerosene lamp from Prabat ECI. Another interesting source to study the goods used by women of this time were the writings of women, such as those who studied abroad, and many of these were from the upper caste families. For example, Parvati Attavali went on her first trip overseas in 1918, and she wrote in her autobiography in terms of the issues she faced with the new consumer goods. For example, the shoes that she wore hurt her feet. And her sister similarly observed when she wore her shoes in 1889 in the streets of Bombay, people often peeped out of windows and from balconies at my untraditional behavior. So these new objects increased mobility for the sisters into the colonial public realm, but the same items revealed the problems inherent in women's changing roles. And such challenges were met through negotiating through their writings, as well as the public discussions surrounding such anxieties. And this is also the specialty of Dr. Salahuddin in terms of women's writings. And I look forward to her comments. And here we have a picture of a contemporary umbrella in 1908, and we can imagine what type of umbrella these sisters might have used. So clothing definitely was a huge source of anxiety, and there was a lot of discussion in terms of fashion, modesty, in terms of self-representation within colonial photography, such as these two photos titled A Parsi Family and A Parsi Woman. And writings also documented how women adopted high-necked leg of mutton sleeved blouses in this period, particularly among the Hindus and Parsis, as the most appropriate modest covering to wear under a sari. And advice literature emerged to offer instructions on how to negotiate the dangerous trends of shifting consumption. Household manuals, including vernacular translations of Flora Annie Steele's The Complete Indian Housekeeper and Cook, as well as Indian manuals such as Pandita Ramabai's Sri Dharmaniti, emphasized the importance of consumption choices as part of housewifely skills in general. They also instructed readers on how to decorate the home. Exhibitions, museums, and fancy fairs provided physical sites for similar advice. And here we have an interesting advertisement for soap. Since most research on changes in the late 19th century focused on men's clothing and accessories, I would like to highlight that women also took on new goods, and there was a changing idea of corporeal cleanliness and a growth in consumption of perfume and soaps. And we can see a continuity in terms of how these products are advertised in South Asia. Here, the text behind the woman writes lovable complexion, and there are some parallels we can draw with contemporary cosmetics. And finally, I would like to end on a cautionary note that despite increase in purchasing power and visibility under public spotlights, women continue to suffer from gender inequality. And I will provide a snippet from the Mughal period. So there is a archive record that indicates Nura Singh selling a girl to Dandi Mir for 1.5 rupees in Allahabad. And fast forward to the 1880s, there was a prevalence of purchasing brides within the Brahmin community of Madras, which prompted a Maharaja to propose the Kanya Sulkam bill to prohibit such a practice of purchasing brides. Um, and in fast forward again to the 1990s, there is a rise in terms of non-resident Indian income and debates surrounding dowry and incidents of dowry abuses in Telangana. And so even though like there's an increasing commercialized realm and women can participate in negotiations surrounding consumption, there's still a danger of violence facing women in South Asia. So here's an ad for coffee, and it exhibits such power dynamics where the man of the household is presumably asking his wife, is the coffee ready? So even though coffee can be seen as a neutral good that anyone can consume, it is still advertised in such a way that does not upset the patriarchal dominance. Um, and that is my presentation. And I hope that it has highlighted some of the approaches we can take to complicate the history of consumption in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was indeed very interesting. And now I'll request Dr. Amreen to please start her discussion. We can have
Thank you,
question
Asma.
answers, Wendy, at the end. You can stop sharing. We can have it in the end. Yes, Dr. Amreen. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Asla. So, uh, well, it was a very interesting presentation. First of all, I must say that, and I guess that our scholar has really explored the history of consumption in South Asia, and we are looking forward to her work when it will be published or when it will come out. So, when I was listening to her presentation, and she mentioned about the feminist. Miss Rukaiya. So the quote about the nose ring. So it reminded me of a short story. Since I am more into gender in literature, it reminded me of a short story of Zaitoon Bano. She writes in Pashto, and in the Pashtun tradition, there is this one tradition that the girls wear a nose ring while they are unmarried. So there is this character Maro in her short story who is wearing a nose ring, and one day she realizes that I'm still wearing it, and I'm now 45 years old, and there is no prospect of my getting married so that I'll be able to remove the nose ring. So she removes it by herself. So that is one very interesting short story, and there is I mentioned it right now because your quote reminded me of it. And secondly, this also tells us that when we talk about this tradition of consumption, we also should understand that it is about the social norms, the cultural learnings. Then there are the emotional and psychological factors that are involved. There is your taste, your style, your identity that actually is involved in the practices of consumption. So consumption is not only about purchasing something. You're just standing there, and at the counter you pay for something and you get it. It is not only about that. It is about all these things that I mentioned, the culture, the tradition, all that is behind all this practice. And then you actually keep that thing, or you dispose it off till the time you dispose it off or you pass it on, it all stays there. So when I thought of this topic while I worked a lot on fiction created by, written by the Pakistani fiction writers, I thought about it. So many things were coming to my mind, and in such a short time, I will try to just talk about some of the other examples. Like I gave this example of a short story by Zaitoon Bano, which she wrote back in 1959. So there are so many other things where there is this concept of the breadwinner, a man, and the consumer, that is a woman. So the man is bringing something to the house and the woman is just spending. So these concepts are repeated again and again in literature by the writers, which shows the construction of certain gender roles, that the economic burden is on the man, and he is earning through a lot of struggle and going out every day, and the woman is there just spending it. I read somewhere in a book about consumption, "O woman, thy name is consumption." I mean, it was a satire basically. Obviously we understand that, but this tells us that this is the identification of the feminine self with these shopping sprees, with domestic displays, and with spending. This is what they are supposed to be doing, you know, as if there is, when a woman is involved in everyday mundane purchases and all those things, in which she has to do because she has to keep the household going on. This is a part of her woman work, which is not counted as work actually, because it is not paid work. So does it my question would be that it has actually nothing to do with the man, with the male, with masculinity. There is no association of these words with the acquiring of commodities or something. So that is also a question. But somehow when I read the fiction and I recall what I have read, actually this is the way that which is the this is the way that the representation of the feminine self is done. The contrast is made in this direction, that the female or the woman or the feminine person is actually consuming more or is involved in this consumption practices. And then also there are other things as well, because when we talk of consumption, the notions and the concepts of social stratification, the class differences, the way the characters are represented, that also should be taken into account. And then there is one thing that the female fiction writers have been involved in writing about, when they talk of the women and the feminine self. There is this whole concept of making dowry of girls, that is there in literature a lot. Because I remember in one of the short stories, Khadija Mastoor wrote that, okay, if God has given me a daughter, one of the characters said actually, if God has given me a daughter, I could spend my time in making her dowry. You see, so this is an activity that is there. And then there are also things that that the dowry is being made. That short story by Ismat Chughtai, Chauthi Ka Joda. Chauthi is actually a ritual that is there. So the dress for that ritual to be made for a girl, that is such a, there is so much satire in the story. There is so much gloom in the story. And this B Amma is, trying to stitch that one dress for her daughter, and she thinks that once she is done with stitching that dress, her daughter will be married. You see, so she is selling her gold bangles even to feed that son of her brother, who she thinks has arrived at her home to marry her daughter. So there is such great written pieces by our female writers, I really, really try to, highlight that contribution of the women writers because the way they have represented the society in their works, that is really remarkable. So that short story talks about it, and then there are other stories by Khadija Mastoor and Hajra Masroor. They talk about dowry as well. You know, as in one of the short story, I think Haja Masroor writes that layers after layers of clothes for dowries, the fabrics that were stitched by my mother, the fabrics that were, set by my grandmother, they are there in the suitcases, and in the everyday work that I have to deal with, I don't even have time to open it and wear those. So these are also, I guess, certain things that comes up. And then there is, when we talk about consumption, the food and eating and all that also is very much important, I guess. Because I am still exploring it. I'm also like Adrienne. I'm also trying to explore these. So when we talk about food and consumption, this novel by Banu Qudsiya, Raja Ged, The Vulture King, that comes to mind as well, because she talks of lawful and unlawful food in that, and then she talks of another kind of food, the Mano Salva, that is the food of the Israelites, and that is why she says that they have such remarkable intellect, because they are not eating they have not eaten the regular food, so it is in their genes. And then when she talks about the vulture king, and she actually, the main characters of the novel, one of them is Qayyum, whom she actually calls the vulture, and Simi is the dead meat, and she's the leftover of Aftab. I mean, I cannot tell the whole story, but maybe
It's between
somebody.
like, yeah, if you want prohibited and unprohibited foods and halal and
Yeah,
haram.
you're
Yeah,
right. I
yeah,
cannot, the concept of lawful and
yeah,
unlawful. Which
yeah, yeah,
food is lawful and which is unlawful,
yeah,
and how a vulture eats the dead
yeah,
meat, and she relates the
yeah,
dead meat to the unlawful, and the
yeah.
practices. What
The
Qayyum does, that is
characteristics,
also.
yeah, the characteristics by eating the unlawful actually transfers into a
Yes,
person and they become more like a
what
vulture.
Qayyum
Yeah,
became
did,
actually.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so these are all the things. So I was thinking of so many things, and I was wondering that maybe the people who are participating in this webinar, they may have certain questions, so may we can also explore the concept further. So I just gave a few examples of what I was looking into, and I am surely going to trying to focus more on it. I am going to work on it. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, so that there is another thing that I'll be working on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amreen. Actually, to be honest, this is by far one of the most interesting session that OIN has done. I'm impressed by the infographics and detailing of Miss Wendy and Dr. Amreen. What you were doing, it's actually cold here, and you were narrating stories, and it was so enjoyable listening to. It was more like a storytelling session, and I was just like to keep listening to this.
Thank you. Thank
So yeah, I think students are also very engaged. I can see the chat. It's filled with very nice comments for both of you. I'm really happy. So let's make this conversation more engaging and open up the session for floor for question answers. So if anybody has questions, can you please raise your hand icon so that I can get back to you? In the meantime, Ms. Wendy, I would like to ask you, this is a bit off the topic, but what actually made you do research on this South Asian region, particularly, and consumerism, especially the Mughal era, the princesses? Because for us, it's understandable because we belong to this region. But for someone living in US and doing research in this area, it's really interesting. I would like to hear about it.
Sure. I think one inspiration aside from the academic side was definitely like personally visiting places in South Asia and how there is an emphasis on the West or people from the outside as consumers. And then when you return to your home country, then you are expected to produce knowledge. And there was a lot of tension for me in terms of like how to negotiate like these two aspects of studying South Asia. Like on the one hand, you are expected to somehow support a developing economy, but on the other hand, it is also like um, an extra task in addition to academic research. Yeah, so that's one of the inspirations. And for Mughal women, I think nowadays there's also more research into how they live their lives. And one thing that struck me was that many of them actually remained unmarried, the sisters of emperors. And for me, it's like an interesting point to explore the question of women's agency. Did they have more agency or less because of this particular position they occupied? Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the first question. The first question is, when talking about gender, why people discuss the issues of only females? You both are welcome to, give your perspectives.
Okay, I think our guest would like to say something, otherwise I'll respond. Wendy, please see.
Is this question in the chat or this was in like a separate?
It was actually pre-received
Oh,
when we forward. Yeah.
so as I mentioned in the beginning, it gender history studies the system of relationships between genders, and it's not just women's history. Yeah.
And one thing I would like to add here is that it's not that when we are studying gender studies, or we are teaching it, we do not indulge in talking about women alone. We talk about all genders. We also talk about transgenders as well. But the thing is that when there are marginalized communities around, there is definitely more talk on them as well, because if there is no inequality, if there is actually equality and equity, then there is no need to emphasize on just one gender. So the tilt is because of the existing realities. There is oppression, there is discrimination, there is violence. So that is why the talk tilts towards that. But I would say that what we were discussing today, the idea of consumption, and I talked about the gender roles. So it is all, the roles are also a construction of patriarchy somehow. So I think if we will go in this direction, it will be a long debate. So we should move
Yeah,
on to the
yeah,
next question.
yeah, yeah.
Maheen has a question. If Maheen, you may ask.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum to all. And firstly, I would really like to thank Ma'am Ambreen, because she just reminded me the course of the history of English history. I mean, the South Asian history, the course I had just ended in my last semester. So my question is from Ma'am Ambreen, that Ma'am, you discuss a very theoretical, in a very theoretical way, the whole difficulties regarding to female gender. So my question is this, that how you see the racism, I mean the term racism under the female gender. I mean not only the racism that is prevailed from white, or maybe the black and white women, but we see that the racism concept is still prevailing in contemporaries and in our society as well. I mean, black woman is also just prevailing that difference among woman to woman. So how you can, I mean, how you see this this point of view?
All right, I got your question. Actually, when we talk of discrimination or disparity as regards to gender, we do not talk, we cannot actually talk of it in isolation. So there is always an intersection of gender with race or with class or with caste or with other such ethnicity maybe. So there is this aspect that is very much there. So when we talk of race, it is definitely prevalent, and what we witness in our society, the minority communities, that intersection is definitely very much there. They are, if the minority communities are discriminated, or there is violence, or there is discrimination, then women are affected by it more, because there is an intersection of gender and race that is very much there. So it is still prevalent, I guess. It would be clear for you. There are so many questions actually in the chat box.
Yeah, I have just copied all the questions that I have received. Some of them seem incomplete to me, but you can read and whichever you may want to answer.
I guess the participants are actually not focusing on the
Consumption part.
consumption part, on the topic that we
Yeah,
are discussing. I guess they should be asking more questions about
yeah,
that, instead of
yeah,
the debate on gender and inequality
yeah,
and all that.
yeah, yeah. That's a long debate, and it's a different kind of debate. We can do
It is
sometime else.
a different kind of
Yeah,
debate.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Rajiv, would you like to pick some question and respond to it? I would.
Yeah, there is another question that I just received, that how consumerism has changed from the era or period of your study, this is from Adrian, to today's consumerism patterns of this region.
How consumerism changed from the
Yeah,
period I studied to consumerism of today.
today in this region, yeah, South Asia.
So that is part of the challenge in terms of studying consumerism, because academic work investigated the progress of women's rights in terms of inheritance and dowry. But they do not study as much as what women do with such economic resources once they have attained such economic independence, you may say. So, for example, what Dr. Ambreen mentioned in terms of the dress that the mother-in-law sewed for, or not mother-in-law, the mother sewed for her daughter, what how can we think about the mothers that we witness today, and do they have like alternatives to sewing wedding dresses in terms of their income or feeding the future son-in-law? And I think a good approach would be looking at Bollywood films or other films of the subcontinent, and how they portray such consumption practices, and do women imbibe these attitudes exhibited in the films, or do they have their own approach in terms of how they perceive themselves? And this whole debate fascinated me in terms of jeans, and whether wearing jeans meant you were a modern girl, or not wearing jeans meant something different. And so I think someone should do a study on that. Yeah.
Great. You're so very
Dr.
right.
Marine, would you like to add something to this question?
Well, I was this is actually very much interesting, because in the other day in one of my class we were discussing it, that if the media today, or the drama writers today wants to show uh, a woman who is really modern, she'll be wearing jeans. And if
Yeah.
they are going to show a woman who is a very
From
simple
modest
person,
background. Yeah.
from modest family, she'll be wearing shalwar kameez.
Yeah.
And secondly, there is not only that they are modern or they are simple. If they want to show a bad woman, I'm using the word, she will
Yeah.
be wearing jeans. And if
Yeah.
they want to show a really good woman, she will be wearing a
Yeah.
very modest dress, which is
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very depressing actually, because how you are going to portray a girl who is good,
Yeah.
that she is good, so she is wearing something modest or something that the society approves of. So this
Yeah.
is a very different kind of a situation we have landed in.
Yeah. And Dr. Marine, don't you think this actually shows what is our behavior and attitudes towards, women especially, and then again, how we,
The mindset.
put that in a box. We stereotype people with their dressing, with their consumerism, patronism, and, the marginalized society you were talking about.
Actually, this has been my focus as well while I was exploring the archetypes in literature written by women writers. That there is this good woman, and the best woman is the one who never leaves her house, who never talks, who can
Yeah.
never disagree with anyone, who never tries to shop for herself. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what I have seen actually,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
one who goes out of the house, who actually crosses that threshold. And in one of my articles, I have focused on this threshold as the Lakshman Rekha in South Asian context. That when
Yeah.
once Sita crosses it, the Ravan will take her away. So this is the whole story about
Yeah.
a woman testing her limits, and woman
Limits.
crossing
Yeah.
the boundaries that are there, because you step outside the home, it does not mean that you are running away uh, with someone. I mean, this is the whole concept behind it. If you cross
Yeah.
the threshold, you are out there to get education, to do your
Yeah.
work, to shopping, or maybe do something that you desire. Why not? Because if there is something that you desire and you do it because you desire it, then I think if there is nothing illegitimate maybe about it, then why
Yeah.
not? I'm using the word legitimate in our religious and cultural context from where
Yeah.
I'm sitting. I'm not
Yeah.
saying in that context that would be a
Yeah.
global context,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
I'm saying it in this context where the society and the culture and norms, but we do not approve of something legitimate a woman would try to do. So
Goes against the society's norms or
yes,
preconceived
indeed,
notions, then
indeed.
it's indeed a woman is on the bad track, is of bad character. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we have another question from Maheen Wasim, that how we can relate consumerism with female sexuality. I think we have just discussed this, but if you want to add anything, Wendy or Dr. Marie.
I think Wendy should respond to that
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yes, I really appreciate what Dr. Ambreen was saying about this boundary. And something I did not touch on in the presentation, but was in my research, was how certain women maintain their respectability by remaining indoors. And so their shopping was primarily done through peddlers or traders
indeed,
that went door to door. And such an act showed society that they did not step outside. They always bought items through such peddlers, especially if they lived in an urban society like Bombay. But on the other hand, there were also rural women who bought from such peddlers because those people were the only source for such women to access goods such as imported items. And so there's like a diversity of feminine sexuality within South Asia. And I think the sources we have mostly focus on the urban context. And there's a lot of debate in terms of hybridity and authenticity. And I don't think, personally, I don't think like the items that you buy would reflect your somehow like this identity or that identity, but because media hypes it in such a way. For example, I'm sure you've heard of this Miss Chakrabarti incident in 2020 when she was discovered with like drugs in her apartment, and it became like a huge middle class anxious aspect in terms of her sexuality and her boyfriend's suicide and what that meant for South Asian women in general. And so I don't think like her having these items meant her sexuality was compromised, or because she has the agency of her own. But it's a bit more complicated when you are exploring historical resources because you cannot access the living person as such. So that's my response.
Yeah. So anyone else has a question? If they want to ask? I don't think so. I think this is about it. If no one else has a question, we can move forward with this, move ahead with this session. Okay, thank you so much to both our esteemed speakers for today's discussion. It was indeed really interesting, really engaging. Everyone was so much involved. So thank you for both the speakers for your time. Before we go, we'd like to share our token of appreciation by giving out the certificates of participation and appreciation to both our speakers. And then Ali, if you can share the screen and I'll email them also.
Yes, please.
Thank you again, Ms. Wendy, because I know the time difference between USA and Pakistan is almost 10 hours and it's really early morning there.
No worries.
Ali, it's not clear. Yeah, okay. First one is of Dr. Amreen Salahuddin. Thank you. Thank you so much for your engaging talk.
Thank you.
And this, yeah. And second one is for Ms. Wendy. Ali, if you can move this. Dr. Amreen, we should do it more often, actually.
Why
The
not?
response from this, yeah.
Why not? And,
Yeah.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all the other speakers, we have promised that we'll be giving you e-certificates. So after the session, and just give us a day or two and we'll get back to you with your certificates of participation. Thank you once again, all of you, for your participation, and have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Hafiz.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Bye-bye.